I slept with a stranger in the airplane bathroom less than 6 hours before landing back into my husband's arms. And that would have been bad enough. But then, at the family dinner 2 nights later, I saw him again, sitting across from me, smiling, shaking hands with my husband, because apparently that stranger was his cousin. My name is Rachel Klein. I'm 34 years old. I work in digital marketing, and I live in Austin, Texas with my husband, Noah. We've been married for 6 years. He's calm, reliable, the kind of man who folds his socks, reads financial blogs, and never forgets to refill the Brita. People say we're the stable couple, the boring ones if they're being honest. And for the most part, I used to be okay with that. I liked safe. I liked knowing what tomorrow looked like. Until apparently I didn't. It started with a trip I never wanted to take, a 3-day branding conference in Chicago. My boss insisted, said I needed FaceTime with the creative leads from our client's agency. I rolled my eyes, packed a carry-on, and promised Noah I'd be back Sunday night. He kissed my forehead and told me not to worry about a thing, that he'd take care of dinner and laundry. I slept like hell in the hotel. The panels were boring. The networking was worse. The whole city felt gray. On Sunday morning, hungover from 2 glasses of wine and 1,000 fake smiles, I got to O'Hare way too early and just sat at the gate, watching people move. That was when I noticed him. At first, just the voice, deep, relaxed, talking to a gate agent with a kind of lazy charm I hadn't heard in years. When I looked up, he was standing 2 seats away from me. Tan coat, messy dark hair, a duffel slung low on one shoulder. He had this quiet, effortless confidence, the kind that says, I don't chase things, they come to me. I wasn't planning to speak to him. God, no. I was tired. I looked like shit, and my phone was at 8%. But he sat down beside me without asking, smiled like he knew a secret, and said, You look like you just lost a bet. I laughed. That was the beginning. We didn't exchange names. That was the unspoken agreement. We talked about airport food, about how Chicago pretends it's not cold, about the worst flights we'd ever taken. He made me laugh, a lot. I told him I was flying back to Texas. He said, me too. We were both in economy, same row, different sides. But as soon as the seatbelt sign went off, he stood, looked down at me with this mischievous half grin, and nodded toward the back of the plane. Like it was nothing, like we'd done this before. I hesitated. My hands shook a little. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't even tipsy. I was very much aware of what I was doing, of what it meant, of what kind of person that made me. And then I followed him. You can imagine the rest. We didn't speak much after. We exchanged one look, not regretful, not gleeful either, just charged. And when we landed, he disappeared into the crowd. No numbers, no names, just silence and shame. I Ubered home, I kissed Noah. I told him I was exhausted. I said I needed to sleep. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling all night, my body still humming from something I didn't want to admit I missed. And then Tuesday night came. Noah's mom had invited us to dinner. Just family, she said. Simple and casual. Her version of casual meant 5 different salads and a white tablecloth. We arrived late. The table was already set. And then I saw him, standing by the wine rack, talking to Noah's uncle, laughing, holding a glass of red like it belonged in his hand. My stomach dropped. My whole body went cold. He saw me. His face didn't change. Not even a flicker of shock. Just that same half smile, like he was amused, like he'd known this was coming. I didn't even have time to react. Noah's hand pressed lightly against my back as he guided me forward. Rachel, this is my cousin Drew, he said. He just moved down from Portland. You two should talk. He's in creative too. And Drew, that bastard, just extended his hand like we were meeting for the first time. Pleasure, he said. My legs barely held me upright. I took his hand and smiled. I don't remember much of that dinner, to be honest. I sat there like someone half sedated. My fork moved. I laughed once or twice at the right beats. I think I complimented the roasted carrots. But my body wasn't there. I was watching from above, like a ghost at her own funeral. Drew, or whatever the hell his real name was, sat across from me, diagonally, 2 seats down. Not close enough to touch, but just near enough to feel. His eyes met mine twice, not for long, just long enough to remind me he was real. Noah didn't notice a thing. He never does. He has a blind spot for discomfort. Maybe that's one of the reasons I married him. He doesn't see the fractures. He smooths everything over, keeps things running, lets you fall apart in private if you need to. His mother, Elaine, was in her usual element, pouring wine, gossiping about neighbors, offering unsolicited decorating advice to her sister. She adored Drew, it turned out. Such a talent, she gushed. He used to draw as a kid. Did you know he worked in film? Drew just smiled politely. Bit of everything. Mostly design work lately. When he said the word design, his eyes flicked to mine again. Just a flick, but I felt it like a spark under my skin. After dessert, I excused myself to the bathroom. I stood at the sink for what felt like 20 minutes. I didn't recognize the face in the mirror. Flushed cheeks, pupils too wide, lips parted like I'd just run a mile. My chest wouldn't stop rising and falling, like I'd forgotten how to breathe without effort. And then a knock. "Sorry, Rachel?" A voice I knew too well. I opened the door, just a crack. He was leaning against the opposite wall, arms folded. "You okay?" he asked. I didn't answer, just stared at him, trying to place the version of him from the plane into this one. Clean shaven now, blue button down. Still that same confidence, like the room was his and he was just letting the rest of us use it for a while. "What the hell are you doing here?" I whispered. He raised an eyebrow. "Your husband invited me. It's not like I hunted you down, but you knew." "I didn't. I swear. I didn't even realize until I saw you. You think I planned this? That's not my style." I didn't know what to believe. My heart was racing so loud I could barely think. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind me. He stepped back. "No one saw anything," he said gently. "Relax." "I'm married," I hissed. I gathered. "You're his cousin." "Second cousin." "Oh, well, that makes it fine then," I snapped. He smiled, not mocking, just amused, like he was enjoying watching me unravel. "Look," he said, tone softening. "What happened on the plane, it happened. We were strangers. It was supposed to stay that way." I folded my arms. "So what now?" He shrugged. "We pretend it never happened." I stared at him, waiting for more, but that was it. "Unless," he added slowly, "you don't want to." That was when I walked away, straight back to the dining room, sat down, smiled, pretended nothing had happened. Noah was telling a story about college roommates and leftover pizza. I nodded at the right moments. I chewed my lip until it bled. The worst part? Drew stayed for another hour. He helped clear the plates. He offered to fix Elaine's broken cabinet hinge. He fit in effortlessly, like he'd been part of the family for years. Noah liked him, said he reminded him of a younger version of his uncle, but cooler. That night, back home, I lay awake in bed for hours. Noah snored softly beside me, one arm flung across my waist. His skin was worn, his breath even. I didn't feel anything. I replayed the flight, the smell of the plane, the heat of his hands, the sound I made when I shut it down. Tried to force myself to think about work, laundry, anything but the thing that was now embedded in the folds of my brain. The next morning, I found a message request on Instagram. No profile photo, no name, just one sentence. "You looked beautiful last night." I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. I didn't think I would see him again. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, a mistake I would bury under layers of guilt, rationalization, and distraction. When I boarded my connecting flight back to Chicago, I told myself it had been a moment of weakness, of grief, of reckless anonymity. I never even got his full name, just Lucas, and the memory of his hands. The plane landed at O'Hare around 11 a.m. My husband, Mark, was waiting by baggage claim, holding a coffee and wearing the jacket I'd bought him last Christmas. His smile was warm, familiar, grounding. He hugged me like nothing had changed, because for him, nothing had. I kissed him back and told myself I was home now. I would never tell anyone what happened. I would go back to my life, my marriage, my routines. That resolve lasted exactly 5 days. It was a Saturday. Mark had offered to cook, which meant we'd probably be ordering Thai food by 7. I was still jet-lagged, catching up on emails from work, when he came in from the garage holding a bottle of wine and said, "By the way, my cousin Lucas is coming to dinner." I turned. "Who?" "Lucas, from my dad's side. He just moved here from DC. Remember, I told you at Christmas." My mouth went dry. "No, I don't think you did." "Really?" "Huh. Well, he's cool. He's around our age, a writer or editor or something. You'll like him." I couldn't breathe. I stared at the bottle of Merlot like it might provide an escape route. "Wait," I said carefully. "Lucas from your dad's side? Tall? Dark hair?" "Yeah, a little quiet, but funny once you get to know him. He was at the funeral, but you probably didn't notice. You were kind of not yourself." I laughed, a sound that didn't belong to me. "Right. Of course." Mark didn't notice my panic. He was too busy debating whether to make pasta or just go straight for takeout. I excused myself, went to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub shaking. Lucas, the man I had slept with, anonymously, in a hotel room in Montreal, was my husband's cousin. I had met him before, apparently, at a family gathering maybe, and now I had slept with him, drunkenly, passionately, without knowing who he was. I should have confessed. Right then, I should have told Mark everything, begged him to believe it was a coincidence, to understand how impossible it all was. But I didn't. Instead, I did my makeup, put on a loose sweater, and practiced my smile in the mirror. When Lucas arrived, he looked just as surprised as I was. He paused in the doorway, holding a small bouquet of flowers like a peace offering. His eyes met mine, and for a second, the air collapsed between us. "Lucas," Mark said, grinning. "This is my wife, Claire." Lucas didn't speak, just nodded slowly, his lips parting slightly. "Nice to meet you," he said, eventually. I offered my hand. "You too." He took it, briefly. No squeeze, no trace of anything. We had dinner, Thai as predicted. We talked about traffic and real estate and the White Sox. Lucas answered questions politely, asked a few of his own, and didn't say a single word that might have hinted at our shared secret. And yet, every time he looked at me, I felt my skin burn. After he left, Mark kissed my forehead and said, "See, I told you he was cool." I nodded, trying not to cry. Because he was more than cool. He was dangerous. He was a memory I couldn't unmake. And now, he was part of my family. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the car ride home. The silence wasn't tense, exactly. It was thick, like fog. Every second that passed made it harder to breathe, and harder to admit that anything had actually happened between us. I stared out the window, trying to focus on the rhythm of the streetlights sliding across the glass. But all I could see in my peripheral vision was him, Leo, with one hand on the wheel, the other drumming faintly against his thigh. His jaw was tight. He hadn't even looked at me since we buckled in, and that somehow made it worse. When we pulled into my driveway, the lights were still on in the living room. "Shit," I muttered under my breath. He's still awake. Leo shifted in his seat but didn't look at me. Should I drive around for a while? I didn't know what I was supposed to say. My brain wasn't keeping up with the reality of the night. I had slept with a stranger on a plane. I had kissed him again in a hotel hallway. And now I was back home, with my husband, and the man I cheated with was parked in our driveway. I can't. I have to go inside, I said, reaching for the door handle. Leo grabbed my wrist, gently but firmly. Wait. I looked at him. His eyes were finally on me. There was no smugness there, no heat, just regret, sadness, and something that almost looked like guilt. This didn't mean nothing, he said. I don't care what you tell yourself later. It wasn't a mistake. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was dry, my stomach knotted. I pulled my hand away and opened the door. Good night, Leo. He didn't stop me again. I walked inside on trembling legs, my heart still thudding. James was on the couch, a book in his lap and a glass of wine, half finished, on the table. He looked up when I entered. You're late, he said, not angry, just surprised. There was a delay at baggage, I lied smoothly, and traffic. He studied me for a moment, eyes narrowing just slightly. You okay? I nodded, just tired. He didn't press. He never did. That was the thing with James. He trusted me. Implicitly. Blindly. The guilt of that hit me harder than Leo's kiss ever had. We went to bed in silence that night. James curled into his usual position, one arm across my waist. Breathing steady within minutes. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the shape of Leo's mouth still burning behind my eyelids. The next few days were a blur. I tried to throw myself into routine, grocery shopping, emails, laundry, dog walks, anything to avoid thinking. But the problem was, Leo had embedded himself into the edges of my life. Not just as the man I'd slept with, but now as a name in my husband's phone. A person who might be sitting across from us at a future family dinner. A cousin. Every time I thought of it, my stomach flipped. James didn't mention Leo at first, but by Thursday, he brought it up casually over breakfast. You remember that cousin I told you about? He asked between bites of toast. Leo? I froze. My coffee cup hovered halfway to my mouth. He texted me. Said he's in town for a while. Wants to maybe catch up. I managed to smile. Oh, that's nice. James smiled back. I barely know the guy, but, family, right? Right. He said he might stop by Saturday, actually. I told him we'd be around. The coffee turned bitter in my throat. Saturday. 2 days. 2 days until I had to face the man I'd slept with, in my home, in front of my husband, pretending nothing had happened. I spent Friday in a fog. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I was terrified Leo would message me, say something reckless. But he didn't. Not a word. No calls. No texts. Not even a cryptic emoji. Part of me was furious. Another part, relieved. Saturday came too quickly. I cleaned the house obsessively. Not for Leo, of course, but to distract myself. James grilled on the patio. I made a salad. I kept checking the front window like a teenager waiting for a date. And then the knock came. My breath hitched. James opened the door. Hey, man. Leo stepped inside like a ghost from a fever dream. He looked casual. Jeans, a navy shirt, a jacket slung over one shoulder. His eyes met mine for exactly 1 second, and then flicked away. Hey, he said, shaking James's hand. You remember my wife, right? James beamed. Claire. Leo turned to me. His expression didn't shift. Of course. Nice to see you again. His voice was smooth, neutral, like we were strangers, like we hadn't shared a bed 6 nights ago. Likewise, I managed. We sat on the patio, talked about harmless things. Sports, weather, travel. James laughed too loudly. I smiled too much. Leo barely said a word, and I couldn't stop watching him out of the corner of my eye. When James went inside to grab more drinks, Leo finally turned to me. His voice was low, tight. You told him? Of course not, I hissed. Jesus, Leo. I had no idea he was your husband, he said. I swear to God. I believe you. He looked at me, really looked. Do you? I didn't answer. And in that moment, under the setting sun, with the smell of grilled vegetables and the sound of James humming inside, something cracked in me. I wasn't done with Leo. Not yet. I thought I could handle it. That Saturday evening, after Leo left, I told myself it was over. We'd crossed a line and now we had to bury it. Deep, far below dinners and smiles and casual greetings. We had to forget. But memory doesn't work like that. And neither does chemistry. The next morning, I woke up before James. I lay there, staring at the ceiling again, trying to convince myself that what happened on that plane, in that hotel, in my house, was just an accident, a collision of grief, lust, and coincidence. But the ache in my chest said otherwise, and when I closed my eyes, I didn't see my husband. I saw Leo, backlit by firelight, his gaze steady and quiet. By Monday, it was all I could think about. I kept replaying every word Leo had said, every look, every silence, and worse, every second he'd acted like he didn't know me in front of James. That stung more than I expected. It wasn't that I wanted him to confess or confront me. I just hated feeling like I'd been erased. Because I hadn't erased him. I couldn't. That night, James went out for a late meeting with a client. It was rare. He usually worked from home, but he'd been restless lately, looking for projects, for a shift in pace. I used to admire that about him, his drive, his clarity. Now all I could see was the way his absence made space for someone else. I picked up my phone. I stared at Leo's name in my contacts for a full minute before I finally typed, "Are you free?" He replied instantly. "Where?" My fingers shook. "Anywhere, just not here." He sent a location, a pub not far from the city center, one of those old brick places with dim lighting and heavy booths. Safe, anonymous. 10 minutes later, I was in my car. I didn't even think about what I wore. Just jeans, a sweater, hair pulled up. I didn't care if I looked good. I just needed answers, or closure, or maybe just him. When I arrived, he was already there, alone in a corner booth, 2 beers in front of him. He stood when I approached like a man raised on old manners. It made me flinch. James always did that too. "Claire," he said softly. I sat. I didn't say anything. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Finally, he said, "I wasn't expecting to see you again." "You're my husband's cousin," I said flatly. "We'll see each other." He nodded, took a sip of his beer. "Still, didn't think you'd text." I shouldn't have. Probably not, but I did. Silence. Again. He looked tired, more than before, and I realized, maybe for the first time, that this wasn't just happening to me. He was tangled in this too. "I didn't plan it," he said, "that night on the plane." "I know. I wasn't trying to seduce anyone. I just talked, and you listened." "I know." He stared into his glass. "I've never done anything like this before." "Me neither." More silence, but this time it settled like warmth between us. He finally looked up. "I felt something with you. I still do." I exhaled, shaky. "Leo, I'm not saying we should do anything," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to blow up your life, or mine. I didn't want to pretend it didn't matter." I nodded, too fast. It did. His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you. But it can't happen again." He hesitated. "Why not?" I blinked. "Are you serious?" He leaned forward, voice low. "You're telling me that if you had the chance, without guilt, without consequences, you wouldn't want it again?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out, because I didn't have an answer, not one I could say out loud. He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." We sat like that for a long time, not touching, not even close enough to. But the tension was louder than shouting, thicker than smoke. When I finally left the pub, he didn't try to follow me. He didn't kiss me. He didn't even touch my hand. But I could feel him on my skin the entire ride home. For the next week, everything in my life turned to static. James talked about booking a vacation. I nodded, distracted. He suggested visiting his parents. I said sure, then forgot we had a dinner planned. I burned dinner twice. I left laundry in the washer for 2 days. I missed a client Zoom call because I was standing in the shower, trying to remember what my own name felt like. And then, on Friday, the message came. I haven't stopped thinking about you. I don't know what to do with it, but I had to say it. L. I stared at it for 10 minutes before deleting it. Then I spent the rest of the night in bed, staring at the ceiling, just like I had the week before. Only this time, my hand wandered beneath the sheets, and I hated myself for it. But I didn't stop. Not until his name left my lips in a whisper I couldn't take back. I tried to pretend it didn't happen. That moment under the sheets, alone, whispering Leo's name into the dark, I told myself it was just release. A fantasy. Something to be buried under errands and emails and calls with James's mother. Something to be washed away by time, by shame. But it wasn't. It lingered. It stained everything. And when I looked at my husband, I didn't see betrayal or guilt. I saw distance. I saw a man who thought he still knew me and had no idea that parts of me were slowly slipping away. That I was starting to live inside a memory I hadn't even made yet. The following weekend, James's parents invited us for dinner. A family catch-up, his mother called it, but I knew what it was. A check-in. A pulse check on the marriage. We hadn't been around much lately, hadn't brought wine, hadn't updated them on our kitchen remodel or our plans for summer. And worse, I think they sensed it, that slight tilt in me. That something unspoken had taken root. We arrived a bit late, James apologizing as we stepped in, me clutching a bottle of overpriced wine I grabbed last minute at the corner shop. Their house smelled like baked salmon and nostalgia, beige walls, framed childhood photos, a strange, sterile warmth. And then he walked in. Leo. I didn't know he'd be there. He looked different, cleaner, darker sweater, hair combed, shoes polished. Like he'd been warned this was a family night, not a whiskey in the corner occasion. His eyes met mine across the kitchen, just for a second, and everything inside me snapped taut. James went over and hugged him. They joked about football, about a promotion someone at work had gotten. I stood still, clutching that wine bottle, pulse in my throat. Claire, Leo said eventually, approaching. Good to see you. His voice was low, measured. Hi, I said, barely above a breath. And that was it. Dinner passed in a blur. Mashed potatoes, carrots, conversation I didn't follow. I nodded when someone mentioned a cousin's engagement. Laughed too loudly when James's mother told a story about a neighbor's cat. My hands trembled beneath the table. Leo didn't look at me once. Not during dinner. Not during dessert. Not even when James's dad brought out old family albums and we all leaned over the coffee table like we hadn't seen the same photos a dozen times before. But I felt him, the weight of his presence behind me, somewhere in the room. The way his fingers drummed against his knee when James asked me to grab more wine from the kitchen. The silence that filled the hallway when I passed him carrying 2 glasses, our arms nearly brushing. He was everywhere, and nowhere, and I was losing my mind. At one point, while James helped his mom with leftovers, I slipped out onto the small back patio for air. It was quiet, cold. I leaned against the railing, tried to count backwards from 100. Anything to pull myself out of this. And then I heard the door open behind me. I didn't turn. He stood there just inside the threshold. You shouldn't be here, I said quietly. I didn't know you'd be here either. A pause. I wouldn't have come. I turned then, met his eyes. And what I saw undid me. He looked like I felt, unmoored, haunted, like something had been set in motion neither of us could stop. "I don't know what to do with this," I whispered. "I feel insane. You're not. I can't stop thinking about you. It's ruining me." He stepped forward, just enough that the light from the hallway caught the edge of his jaw. "Then let it ruin us both," he said. I almost laughed, almost cried. I didn't do either. Instead, I said, "We can't do this. We can't keep meeting like we're strangers." "Then let's stop pretending." I stared at him, eyes burning. "He's your cousin. I know. He's my husband. I know. And yet here you are." "And yet," he echoed. We didn't kiss, we didn't touch, but the space between us sparked like it could catch fire from just a breath. Then the door opened again, and James stepped out, with a beer in one hand and a half-smile on his face. "There you are," he said. "We were starting to wonder if you'd both run off." I swallowed hard, just needed air. Leo's expression shifted instantly, back to casual, safe, friendly. "Yeah, me too," he said. And just like that, the spell snapped. We walked back inside together, side by side, like nothing had happened. Like everything inside me wasn't screaming. That night, I lay in bed beside James with my eyes wide open. He was asleep almost instantly, his arm draped over his chest, breathing slow, untroubled. I turned toward the wall, feeling the sheets against my legs, the silence pressing into me like a weight. All I could think about was Leo, the way he looked at me when no one else was watching, the way his voice curved around certain words, the fact that even when he was pretending nothing was happening, his entire body betrayed him. I could still feel the electricity between us out on that patio, like some invisible thread had tethered us together, tight and hot and wrong. I didn't sleep. I got up at 4 a.m., walked barefoot to the kitchen, and stood there with a glass of water in my hand, staring at nothing. I thought about leaving, just packing a bag and going somewhere. A hotel, a friend's place, anywhere with walls that weren't closing in. But I didn't, because I was still pretending. Pretending I had control. Pretending I could rewind something that had already begun to unravel. Pretending I hadn't let a stranger, no, not a stranger anymore, someone I knew, someone James knew, into a part of me I'd kept locked up for years. The next day, I went through the motions, laundry, emails, grocery shopping. I even made dinner that night. Salmon with lemon and asparagus. James complimented it, kissed my temple, talked about a new marketing client he was chasing. I smiled, I nodded, I asked the right questions. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Inside, I was in a hotel room with warm, yellow lighting and Leo's mouth on my neck. I hated myself for it, and yet I couldn't stop. On Thursday, it happened. I was walking out of the post office, juggling a box and a coffee cup, when my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Come to the cafe on Belmore. Now. I stared at the screen. I didn't have to ask who it was. I didn't have to think twice. 15 minutes later, I was standing in front of the tiny cafe tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop. It was one of those places you'd never notice unless someone told you where to look. Leo was already inside, sitting at the back, wearing a navy coat and a scarf, like he'd stepped out of some moody European film. I walked in, heart hammering, legs numb. He stood up when he saw me. Didn't smile. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. I sat down across from him, my hands trembling as I set my bag on the seat beside me. I shouldn't be here. I know. There was a long silence. Just the clink of cutlery around us and the hum of conversation from other tables. Then he said, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it before you walk away." I looked at him. "I didn't know who you were when we met," he said. "Not on that plane, not in that room. I swear to you, Claire. I know. I didn't seek you out. I didn't plan any of this. I know, but I can't stop thinking about you. And it's killing me. I inhaled slowly, my eyes stinging. I'm married, Leo, and I'm not asking you to leave him. Then what are you asking? He leaned forward, his voice low. I just want one truth between us, one place where we don't lie. I blinked, my throat tightened. I wanted you, I whispered, from the moment you sat beside me. He closed his eyes for a second, exhaled. Me too. The silence after that was unbearable. So I stood up, and he didn't stop me. I walked out of that cafe and felt the cold wind whip across my face like a slap. My body was buzzing. My heart felt like it was caught in my ribs, trying to escape. When I got home, James was still at work. I took a long shower, scrubbed my skin until it was red, tried to rinse the guilt off, but it clung to me. It always did. That night, I dreamed of the hotel again, of the warmth, of a version of my life that didn't involve lying every time I smiled at my husband. And when I woke up, I knew something had changed. I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. The next morning, I told James I was going to visit my sister in Brighton for a few days. It was the easiest lie I'd ever told. Too easy. He didn't even question it. Just kissed my forehead, handed me a 20 for petrol, and told me to get some sea air and clear my head. I nodded, smiled, packed a weekend bag. I even threw in a book I knew I wouldn't read, just to complete the illusion. And then I drove. Not to Brighton. Not even close. I texted Leo from a motorway service station just outside Reading. Room, now, anywhere. He replied in seconds. Rose and Vine Hotel, Wokingham, room 307. It felt like pulling a pin from a grenade. I drove like I was in a dream. Everything outside the car windows blurred. Gray sky, streaks of rain, endless hedgerows. The roads narrowed, the world got quieter, until finally I pulled into a gravel drive, lined with wilting rose bushes and Victorian iron lamps. The hotel looked like something out of another time. Ivy on brick, wooden shutters, a small brass bell on the reception desk. I walked in without speaking to anyone. Just climbed the stairs, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Room 307. I didn't knock. He opened the door before I could lift my hand. Neither of us said a word. The moment the door closed, it happened. Clothes became a nuisance. Conversation disappeared. Everything became touch. Hands, mouths, the scrape of stubble, the sound of breath breaking into pieces. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't tender either. It was raw, heavy, charged with all the words we didn't say. He kissed me like he needed it to survive, and I kissed him like I'd been dead for years. The sheets tangled, the window fogged. At one point, I laughed, sharp, shocked at myself, and he kissed it out of me. We didn't stop for hours. Time folded in on itself. Morning melted into late afternoon. Light shifted across the walls in stripes. When we finally collapsed against each other, skin still slick, hair stuck to our foreheads, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a decade. Alive. Not happy, not safe, just vividly, terrifyingly alive. I should have left. I didn't. We ordered room service. Ate in bed like students. Fingers greasy with chips. Steak gone cold on the tray. He asked me about the art gallery. I asked him about university. We talked like real people, like a couple, but we weren't. He was James's cousin, and I was still James's wife. After dinner, we lay in silence, his arm under my head, my fingers tracing the ridge of his collarbone. I keep trying to feel guilty, I said finally. He turned to look at me. And? I can't. Neither can I. He brushed my hair back, looked at me like I was something delicate. It unnerved me more than anything else. I'll leave him, I whispered. His body stiffened. Claire, I can't keep doing this. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. I'm not asking you to choose. But I could hear the lie in it. I sat up, pulled the blanket over my chest. My heart felt too loud again, like it wanted out. You're not him, I said. I know. And I don't know what this is, or what happens now. But I can't keep going back and pretending. He nodded slowly, eyes unreadable. I'll book another night, he said. You don't have to go back yet. I hesitated, then said, okay. That night, we didn't sleep much, and when we did, it was with arms wrapped around each other, like we were afraid the dream might break. In the early morning hours, just before the sky started to lighten, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him breathe. I had stepped out of the world I built, and now I had to figure out how, or if, I could ever go back. I didn't go home on Sunday. I told James I needed another day to reset. He didn't question it. Why would he? I'd never given him a reason to. I stayed with Leo instead. In that same soft, creaky bed in the Rose and Vine Hotel, the floral curtains drawn against the light, our half-finished wine still on the nightstand. But something had shifted. The heat between us was still there, of course. It roared to life every time we touched. But underneath it, a new tension had begun to form. Not sexual, not romantic, human. Because now, it wasn't just stolen hours and whispered names. Now we were talking about after. We lay side by side, limbs tangled, breath slowing, and Leo said, "What would you do if you weren't married?" The question was too sharp, too direct. It sliced right through the skin of the moment. I turned my face to him. What do you mean? If none of this existed, the gallery, the house, James, your routine, what would your life look like? I stared at the ceiling, thought about it. Really thought. We just looked at each other like we'd been dropped into a decision we weren't ready to make. We had dinner, stir-fry, his specialty. He told me about the news, some funny clip he saw online. I nodded, laughed in the right places, sipped my wine. My body sat at the table, but my mind was on a hotel bed 3 towns away, still warm with memory. That night, he reached for me in bed. It wasn't unusual. He was always affectionate after time apart. He curled behind me, his palms settling low on my stomach. His mouth brushed my neck. I froze. He noticed, whispered, "You okay?" "Just tired." He paused, then kissed my shoulder. "Okay." I stared into the dark for a long time after that. The days that followed blurred into something unbearable. Every room in the house felt like a lie. Every drawer I opened, every shoe I stepped into, every familiar gesture, all of it was hollowed out by the secret I carried. Leo texted sparingly, "Thinking about you. Call me when you can. I miss you." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't feel the same, but because I was afraid that if I acknowledged it, even a little, the floodgates would open and drown everything. But he wasn't patient forever. One night, after I'd ignored 3 of his messages, he sent just one word, "Claire." That broke me. I went to the kitchen, poured a drink, sat down at the table, like I was about to confess a murder, and I called him. He picked up on the first ring. "Claire," he said, not like a greeting, but like a relief. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing I could. "I don't know how to do this." He was silent for a beat. Then, "You don't have to know, but you have to stop pretending you're not doing anything." That landed hard, because he was right. I was doing something. I was living 2 lives, and both were beginning to collapse. The final crack came a few days later. I was walking back from the shops, arms full of groceries, keys between my fingers, when I saw James on the porch. He was on his phone, laughing. I slowed. He didn't see me. And then I heard him say, "Yeah, she's doing better. Still a bit distant, but you know Claire. Quiet is her default." He chuckled. "Anyway, I think we're okay now. She just needed space." My chest tightened. That word, okay. He thought we were okay. He thought I just needed air, and now I was fine, and our life was back on track. And maybe it looked like that. Maybe he couldn't tell the difference between my silence and my unraveling. But I could. I walked into the house, put the groceries down, went upstairs, and opened the drawer where I kept my passport. For the first time in years, I was ready to leave something behind. Not just a house, not just a marriage, a version of myself. And I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew it couldn't be this. I didn't leave that night, or the next. It turns out it's hard to walk away from a life you spent 15 years building, even when it's rotting under your feet. I told myself I needed a plan, logistics, timing, a way to unravel the threads without destroying everything, without hurting James, without turning myself into the villain I already feared I was becoming. But none of that mattered by Thursday, because that was the night everything cracked wide open. It started with a family dinner. James's sister Emily was in town, and she insisted on a little reunion. I wore the navy dress James liked, did my makeup carefully, and plastered a smile on so convincing it scared even me. We sat at a candlelit table near the river, wine glasses catching the flicker of overhead lanterns, soft music in the background, the scent of roasted garlic and sea bass drifting in from the kitchen. I was halfway through my second glass of wine when Emily asked, "Whatever happened to that guy you met on the flight back from Lisbon?" I froze. James turned toward me. "What guy?" She blinked. "Oh, Claire didn't tell you. This was weeks ago. She texted me about it. Said she met someone interesting on the plane. Total stranger. They talked the whole flight. Sounded a bit mysterious, actually." My breath stalled in my throat. James was still smiling, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "No," he said slowly. "She didn't mention that." Emily laughed, oblivious. "Well, I'm sure it was nothing. Just one of those travel things. You know, playing chemistry, like speed dating with turbulence." I forced a chuckle. It was nothing, just a chat. I forgot I even mentioned it. James watched me closely, but said nothing. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I ate but didn't taste, spoke but didn't hear. Every word from James felt like a needle pressing into my skin. And when we got home, I could feel the air between us change. He didn't ask questions. He didn't accuse me. He just went quiet. That scared me more than yelling ever could have. At 2 a.m., I found myself in the kitchen, hands shaking, as I tried to light the stove for tea. The matchbook trembled. The flame kept dying. "Claire," I turned. James stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing an old t-shirt with faded lettering from a band he used to love. His expression was unreadable. "You lied to me," he said. I swallowed. I didn't think it was important. It was. Silence. He stepped forward. "Was it him, the guy you met? Is that who you've been seeing?" I couldn't answer. My throat locked. He let out a bitter laugh. "Jesus Christ, Claire. You've been somewhere these last few weeks, but I hoped, it was just grief, or distance, or something we could fix." I looked at him then, really looked, and I hated what I saw. Not because he looked angry, or betrayed, or even sad, but because he still loved me. And I didn't know what to do with that. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I said quietly. He shook his head. "People don't mean for fires to start, Claire, but they still burn down the house." That's when I broke. I told him everything. The flight, the hotel, the fireplace, the tea, the nights. The way I felt seen for the first time in years. The terrifying pull towards someone I barely knew, but somehow trusted more than myself. I didn't tell him Leo's name. I didn't have to. Because when I paused, breath hitching, James said, "It's Leo, isn't it?" My eyes widened. "How?" "He's my cousin," James said, voice like glass. Distant. We haven't spoken in years. I didn't recognize him at the wedding, but when you started pulling away, When I saw you staring off at nothing, I remembered the photo. From Mum's attic. I put it together. I sank into a chair. Oh my God, James exhaled. The irony's almost funny, isn't it? I couldn't speak. What now? He asked. Not angry, just broken. I don't know, I whispered. I really don't. And that was the truth. Because I didn't know how to unpick the tangle I'd made. I didn't know how to erase Leo from my skin, or how to look at James without seeing the wound I'd carved into him. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not because James asked me to. He didn't say a word. He just stood in the hallway as I folded sweaters and tucked away toiletries like a ghost taking inventory. Before I left, I turned to him. I'm sorry, I said. For everything. He nodded. Do you love him? He asked. The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted, but I know I'm not done with him. That was the last thing I said before closing the door behind me. I didn't go to Leo right away. I rented a small room in a converted barn outside of Oxford. It had a fireplace, a kettle, and a view of nothing but trees. I sat there for 2 days, not moving much, just thinking, crying, sleeping, starting to read again. Leo didn't call. He didn't text. He gave me space. And on the 3rd morning, I woke up to the sound of birds and knew I had to see him. When he opened the door to his flat, a small place above a bookshop, I saw the same look in his eyes I'd seen in the aisle of that plane. Recognition. Not surprise. Not joy. Just something quiet and sure. He didn't ask questions. He just let me in. We didn't talk much that night. We didn't make love either. We just lay there, fully clothed, facing each other, while the city breathed beneath us. I told him about the confrontation, the guilt, the impossible grief. He listened. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't promise anything. He just held my hand, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. It's been 6 weeks. I'm still not divorced. There's paperwork, conversations, complications, but I'm not hiding anymore. I told my mother, my sister, even Emily. The reactions ranged from shock to quiet support to thinly veiled judgment. I can live with that. Leo and I aren't together in the traditional sense. We see each other. We talk. We laugh. Sometimes we sleep in the same bed. Sometimes we don't. There's no plan, no label. Just Stace, just truth. I don't know where it ends. Maybe this was a spark that'll burn itself out. Or maybe it was the beginning of something that only blooms after everything else falls apart. All I know is this. I hadn't even buried my father yet, and Leo was already in my bed. And somehow, that night gave me back my life.